Hey everyone, this is the second Tableau workshop. So if you followed along with the first workshop, you would have seen everything to build up to this file. If you're just starting on the second workshop, all you need is this Eller Tableau Workshop 2 file, and you'll see that there's already stuff created in here. So these blue shaded tabs are the ones that we created in the first workshop, as well as we looked at two different dashboards here, looking at kind of some basic visuals and then putting them together on a dashboard and looking at some simple actions. So in this second workshop, we're going to look at, okay, how can we take something like a basic bar graph and then add some complexity to it to dive a little deeper into the data or show more meaningful trends to the viewer, that sort of thing. So we're going to take those same sort of visuals we've been making and then add to them. And then what I'll do after we've finished these gold colored sheets is then we'll go back and look at some extra things we could have done on some of these basic visuals that we made at the start. Okay, so again, just a refresher, what this data set is the top 5,000 fastest growing companies in the US from 2014, and this is the information that we know about them over here on the left. So we know the company, what their growth was, their revenue, number of workers, what industry they're in, city and state, their rank on the 5,000 fastest growing, all that sort of stuff. And then we made a couple calculated fields and sets as well for the other sheets that we've already created. Okay, so what we want to do on this sheet is, well, let's start looking at revenue across industry and see if there's any patterns that we can see or that we'd want to highlight. So we're going to start with just a basic bar graph, and then we'll talk about how we could use that bar graph to start diving deeper into the data and start to tell a story with our findings. So let's start basic. I'm just going to put growth, not revenue. So let's go ahead and take industry and we'll put that into columns, and then I'll take growth and put that into rows. And again, the choice we have to make is, well, do we want this to be vertical bars or horizontal bars? The last bar graph that I made over here, I did a horizontal bars. This one I just chose to do vertical bars because I think that the later things I'm going to add to this look a little bit better. But again, if you ever aren't sure what you like, there's a little button here to flip between horizontal versus vertical. So I'm going to keep vertical bars. And then I'm going to go ahead and just sort this thing. So I'm just going to click this button up here to sort it from largest to smallest. And I'm also going to change this growth up here. The default is for sum. Anytime you take a number and Tableau is aggregating it to like show for each industry, it starts with sum. Now, why might that be misleading? What if consumer products and services is just the tallest bar because there's the most companies in that industry? Or some of these are like higher because there were just a lot of companies, but on a per company basis, they don't have that much growth. Well, some wouldn't tell me that. It's going to be affected by how many there were. And so if I want to get an idea of the typical company in one of these industries, I should look at average. And so if I go up to the sum growth pill and click the drop down for it, go to measure and change it to average, then I'm going to actually sort these again now. And we can see, okay, consumer products and services is quite a bit higher on growth than any of these other industries. They're kind of standing out here. Energy and food and beverage are a little bit too. Okay, so what we might want to do in a situation like this is draw the reader's eyes to this bar. So one way to do that, or let's say we wanted to have a couple bars, is you can make a set with just the industries you're interested in and drag that to color, and it's going to highlight just that bar or those bars a different color. So that's a good way to draw the viewer to that spot. So I'm going to make a consumer products and services set. So basically I'm going to go to industry over here on the left. I'm going to click the drop down for it and say create set, and I'll call this something like CP and S set, consumer products and services set, and I'm just going to check consumer products and services. And I'll say OK. And then I'm going to take that set and drag it to color. And you can see now I've got that bar that's emphasized. And even if I had these like alphabetical or something, so we could, for example, sort our industry alphabetical by going to sort, and then I'll say alphabetical or something like that. It still keeps that one kind of emphasized, even if it's not the bar all the way on the left. Okay, then something else that I might want to do is maybe see just the growth for this bar. Again, trying to retell this story over and over, really emphasize it to the viewer of that this consumer products and services is kind of an outlier in this case. So what I'm going to do is make a calculated field that's specifically going to show the growth for consumer products and services. So we need to make a calculated field. Again, there's a few ways to do that. The instructions say to, I guess they don't say. So I think the easiest way to remember is if you go up to analysis and then create calculated field. But again, if you don't like that way, you could right click in this white space over here on the left. And I will call this the growth label. And then it's literally just this logic here. Just make sure that for all these commands like if, make sure you're actually selecting from this list, not just typing the word if. It actually has to be chosen from this drop down. So if it's consumer oh, it's because I got rid of, I didn't type it. If CP and S set, then growth. And then on these logical commands, you always have to say end with them. If I didn't have end, you'll see it shows me that there's an error. And if I click the drop down, it says it expected there to be this end function when there's an if command. So I'll say end, and then now it says that this thing works, and we can say OK. And then I'm going to take that and I'm going to put it on my label. And then again, I want to change this to be an average, since right now I'm looking at average growth. And growth in the data was already a %. So if we go over here, I still have the Excel data pulled up. So these growth numbers here are not on a 0 to 1 scale. They're already on a 0 to 100 percentage scale. And so I don't want to, sorry, wrong one. I don't want to multiply this by 100. I want to just have a % sign on it. And so if I go back to the pill for this label, click the drop down and say format, and then if we go to this numbers drop down, what's tempting is to say percentage. But if I do that, you'll see it multiplies by 100 because it thinks, oh, percentages, I need to multiply by 100. So what I need to do instead is go to number custom so that it keeps that original number. I'm going to do 0 decimal places. And in the suffix, I'm just going to type a % to get that % sign on there. And we'll say OK. And we could format these bars to be a little bit wider so that that label is horizontal. We can also just mess with that later on the dashboard to make that thing fit better. Okay, and then what we also might want to see is, and again, it talks about sorting here. You can sort these however you want, whether you want them alphabetical. I have them reverse alphabetical right now, actually. Let me fix that. So alphabetical ascending. I like that. If you want to have them by growth, that's fine too. Last thing I want to show to kind of emphasize this thing is I'm going to put in an average line. So it's going to show the average of all the bars where that would be. So if I go to my analytics tab right here next to the data tab, we've got this option called an average line. You can just drag that over, and I want it across all of the bars. So that's this table option right here. And so there's the average. We can see which ones are above, which ones are below, by how much. You can do a lot of formatting with this line too. So if you just go here to edit, there's all sorts of things you can change about the way it's computed, whether there's fill above or below, if it's just the line, or if you want to see a number with it, what type of thing is on the label. So where it says average, all sorts of stuff. And if you go to this and say format, then you can also make it, for example, like a dashed line. I could make it red, a little bit thicker, so I can do something like that. And then notice I've got a section for formatting the line. I've also got a section for formatting the text. And so like I can make my text red and bold also. Anyway, lots of stuff that you can do for formatting those average lines. And maybe I actually want that to be a little bit less opaque. Or more opaque. Something like that. That's what I like. Okay, so now we've got our average line in there. And we're going to talk about annotations as well. You could make a note on here to the viewer. So like, for example, if I right click on this bar on a Mac, it'd be control click and say annotate and then point. Then I can make a note of something like, notice the extreme growth in the consumer products and services industry. And then I'll make this like a red font as well. And then I'll make this bar. So then I want to format this annotation. So I'm going to say format, and then I'll have my box have no shading, or I'll do white behind it. How about? And then my border, I'll give it a red border. And then for my line, I'll have that be red, and I'll have it be an arrow. Something like that. Again, I just like to format these a little bit to show you guys how you can do the formatting. If you want to edit this text, you can always double click on it. And for example, you could make it centered if you think that looks better. But yeah, so again, just kind of we're starting to tell a story with this. Okay, we see that this consumer products and services set has, or industry has a lot of growth to it. Let's go figure out why. And putting in these notes and the coloring and the label and the average line and stuff, all that kind of draws the reader's eyes to what we're seeing and helps tell our story so that they understand why we're going to go dive deeper into this. So now let's see if, well, maybe is it that the consumer products and services industry is using their workers more efficiently. So let's go look at revenue per worker across the industries. So we don't currently have a revenue per worker. We have revenue and we have workers. And that's something that we looked at back in this scatter plot. We looked at revenue versus workers. I don't currently have that as a variable on its own yet. And so we need another calculated field. So I'll go back to analysis, create calculated field. I'll call this one revenue per worker. And so then all I'm going to say here is average revenue per average worker. And if you're ever doing these sort of things, just make sure that if one of these is average, they both need to be. You can't mix like aggregated data with non-aggregated, so they both need to be averaged in this case. And then I can say okay. And then now let's look at that versus industry. So I'll take industry, and again, it's up to you if you want this to be horizontal or vertical. I'll set up a horizontal bar, and then I'll sort this one just normal descending. And so what do we see here? Well, consumer products and services is only fourth on this list. We could even take our consumer products and services set again and put that on color here to show, hey, look, this isn't really the reason why. Over here, they had this extreme growth, but it's not that they're generating a bunch more revenue per worker or anything like that. And again, we could make another annotation about that here. I already showed how to do an annotation on this one, and so just in the interest of time, I won't do this one as well, but you could just make some note saying, look, they only ranked fourth on revenue per worker. It's good, but it's not anywhere close to what the energy sector was. And so that's probably not the reason why they had that extreme growth. So, okay, now let's look and see if we have any outliers in there. And this is a cool thing you can do with bar graphs anytime you want to look for outliers within a category. So we're going to start with the same bar graph that we had over here of just industry and growth. So if I take my industry, take my growth, and I'm going to again make my growth averaged. So here we're back to that same bar graph that we already had. I'll go ahead and sort these alphabetically as well, just so that it's consistent with what I had on my other one. And then, okay, so how do we look for outliers? It's going to seem a little bit strange at first. So first, what I need to do is whatever my individual components of this data set are. So in this case, company, there's a bunch of specific companies in this data set. I'm going to take that thing and drag it to label. So I'm going to take company name and put that on label. And at first it does this weird little thing. So it's showing what chunk of that bar graph was made up by each company. And wow, we can already see in this consumer products and services bar, a lot of that bar was made up by this company Fuhu. But to make this a little bit easier to see, what we're going to do is in this marks card where it says automatic right here, where it's set to bars, we're going to click that drop down and say circle. So it instead shows circles where the height of that circle is how much it contributed to that industry's growth. And here we can see, okay, Fuhu way above everyone else. So that's likely the reason, or at least one of the reasons, why that consumer products and services industry had so much growth. So now we want to again emphasize that to our viewer. And so first thing we're going to do is we're going to tell Tableau to do this thing called clustering, where we're going to have it identify which of these things should be grouped together based on their similarities. And clustering can get pretty complex. If you follow this link here in the directions, there's a really good article on the Tableau forums that talks about all the different things you can do with clustering and different ways you can use it. So I would suggest looking at that if you want. The one we're going to do is very basic, just to show how to put in clustering. So I'm going to go to my analytics tab, and there's this cluster option here that I'll just drag over to cluster. And I'm going to say the number of clusters we want is 3. So I'm telling it to, based on growth, separate these companies into 3 different clusters based on how similar they are to each other. And so what it's saying is, okay, Fuhu's kind of here on its own. Then Reliant Asset Management and Quest Nutrition are both kind of above everyone else as well. And then everyone else is kind of here together. Now, a cool thing you can do with clustering is you can bring in a bunch of different variables, and then you can even describe the clusters to see how much impact, if really any, those each had on each other. So it's kind of like a regression, if you like stats, where it's looking at a bunch of different factors here. So once I've done that, I can close out of this. And again, if you want, it's not that helpful in this case, but you could go over to your clusters here and say describe clusters, and it gives you information about them, how many items were in each one and what their centers were. And if you had more variables, it would have more columns here of information. Okay, and then what I want to do next is I want to add an annotation to this point here. Again, I already showed an annotation before, and so just in the interest of time, I'll let you all do that one if you want to, but same idea. You'd right click on this, annotate point, and then you can write whatever note you want to the viewer to show them, hey, Fuhu is probably at least one of the main reasons why consumer products and services, that industry was so high on growth. Okay, and so then just to further emphasize our point, what we're going to do is make a pie chart that shows Fuhu's growth versus the rest of the industry for consumer products and services. So if I go over to this pie chart sheet here, so what we're going to do is we need to make a set called Fuhu. So I'm going to go over to company and create a set, and we're going to just have this be our Fuhu set, and then I'm going to select from a list. I'm going to start with none of them selected, and then in this search right here, I can type Fuhu, find that one and check it, and say OK. So now our Fuhu set is just Fuhu. And then so what I'm going to do on this one is I'm going to first, so pie charts, they technically have one in Show Me. There's a pie chart right here. They're a little bit finicky. I don't usually get them to work the way I want to from the Show Me button, and they're easy to make on our own. So if in this marks card, if we just change this drop down to be a pie chart to get us those tools, if I take the Fuhu set and put that on color, so we've got whether it was Fuhu or not Fuhu, basically, which we can rename these things in a second, but that's how we get this thing colored. And then if we want to have the slice of the pie be based on the growth, all I'm going to do is take growth and drag that to angle. And again, we want to change this to be average so that it's looking on a per company basis. No, that's not what we want. No, sorry. We want this to be total still, but I want to look at just the consumer products and services set. So I'm going to look at just consumer products and services by dragging that to filters. And so here's the pie chart for just consumer products and services. Everyone else versus Fuhu. And again, I might want to go up to this fit drop down here where it says standard and say entire view. Okay, so then I just want to make this thing, again, easier to use. And so what I might want to look at is a label for the percent of total growth that was attributed to Fuhu. And then I also might want to change my labels to say like Fuhu versus everyone else instead of just in out of that Fuhu set. So for that first one, let's just make another calculated field. So analysis, create calculated field. We're going to call this one something like percent of total growth. Again, you don't have to follow along with these things specifically. So percent of total growth, and then this one's going to be sum of growth over total sum of growth. And then we'll say okay. So we're going to put that on label, and again, I want to see these as a percent, so I'm going to go to that label's pill, which again I can identify quickly as this little T icon, and T is for label. So if I click that drop down, I can then go into format, go to numbers, say percentage, up to you how many decimals you want. I'm just going to do 0 to make it look a little bit cleaner. And then we can close out of that to see our variables again. And so then I also want to have my labels to say Fuhu, everyone else. And so I need one more calculated field for that. So create calculated field. And then I'll call this one company label. You could call it Foohoo label, whatever you want to say. And so this one's just an if command. So we're saying if the company in question, company name in this case, equals, and then since we're referencing a specific string, that string needs to be in single quotes or an apostrophe, then we want it to just say the company name. We could also have just said Foohoo because Foohoo's the only one that is equal to Foohoo. So instead of company name here, you could have had just single quote Foohoo again. Up to you. Then otherwise, we want it to say everyone else. And then since we have a logical command, we need to end. And so we'll say OK. And then we can put that on the label as well. And then again, you could format these. You could click on the label button to change the order of those. Again, completely up to you. And then again, you could edit this title to say this description. You could use annotation. You can later on the dashboard just put in text describing what this is. Lots of different ways that you can describe this to the user. So now that we've seen that Foohoo accounts for more than half of all the growth in their industry, let's see what the bar graph would look like without Foohoo in it. And so if we go over here, it's just the steps that we're going to do, but really we're going to just duplicate that bar graph that we already had, and then we're just going to exclude Foohoo. So all we're going to do is if we go back to our bar graph here, right click on it on the sheet name or on a mat control, click and say duplicate. And then we can say that this is something like growth with Foohoo removed, or not Foohoo, or whatever makes sense to you to name this thing. And so I probably don't want my annotation here anymore because we're going to remove Foohoo. And so all we do for this one is we're going to go back to our company name and we're going to create a set. We're going to select from the list. We'll call this one something like Foohoo removed or whatever makes sense to you. And we're going to do the same thing we did when we made the Foohoo set, but there's two options. You could search Foohoo and then just uncheck it, or you can choose exclude and then only check Foohoo. Completely up to you. Just to show how the exclude works, I'll do that one. So I'll say none. Then I'm going to check just exclude, and I'm going to go to Foohoo and check that one. So it's saying to exclude Foohoo. And then I'll say OK. And then if we take that and put that in our filters, here's what the bar graph would look like without Foohoo. And so once we have all that done, the next step would be, how do we put this together into a story to tell to the user? And so again, lots of different ways you could do that. So we have a dashboard here. You could just make a tall dashboard, one that the user scrolls down through, seeing each step along the way. So what might that look like if I was going to make a tall dashboard? Let's make this height, I don't know, I'm just going to try like 4,000 or something, and we'll see how that looks. Maybe we have to make it taller, but so now I've got this thing I can scroll down through. And so maybe what I want to do here, again, I'm just going to tell my story. So I'm just going to start by putting in my different visuals. I'm going to do tiled. And so again, it's going to start by filling everything, but I'm just going to get these stacked on top of each other and then show how I could like put text in between to tell this story. And then I'll show some other ways we can do this too. But a lot of Tableau is figuring out the formatting and the layout and stuff that's going to make it easy to digest and get the information across quickly and also in an interesting way. And there's a lot of ways to do that. So I can take my first visual here, and yes, it's really tall, and then maybe after that, I'll show that I looked at revenue per worker. So let's put that in the bottom half. So I'll show my revenue per worker, which I still can't get down to the bottom half yet. Okay, so now that's underneath, and then I'll move this one up. It's going to take a little bit to get these set up in here the way I want. Okay, so first we had this one. Then we looked at revenue per worker. And so then after that, we then looked at the revenue per company. So let's put that one down underneath here. So like there. Okay, so still trying to get this all formatted the way we want. And you can see what I mean of like making a tall one, hopefully. And so then we can show our growth per company underneath this one. And then underneath that, we could show our without foohoo. So down here. So with foohoo removed. So now I've got these things all stacked on each other to tell this story. Then maybe what I'd want to do, and I don't need to see all this anymore, is we could bring in some text. So like I could put a text box in here where I describe what we did. So something about like that, you know, we I'm just going to kind of shorthand this, saw that the consumer services industry had very high growth, so decided to look at revenue per worker to see if industry and then so you'd make this look nice or whatever and format the font to where it's bigger. Again, just kind of guiding the user with what you did. So that's kind of one option, is you could have this tall dashboard that they scroll down through. Another option is you could have a series of dashboards with buttons on them to navigate. So like maybe your first dashboard is just this bar graph with some notes about it. And then you'll see over here in objects, there's this navigation button. So like I could bring a button over here, and then if I double click on that, I can say, okay, I want that to navigate to my other dashboard that has revenue per worker, and then a button on there that navigates to the next dashboard. So they keep clicking these buttons, and again, you can format the way they look and everything. You can change the text. So you can say to revenue per worker, and you'd format all this stuff and so on. Sorry, the title should have said to revenue per worker. So I'd have this button, and then on revenue per worker, make sure you have a button that goes back. That's another option. And if you don't like a series of dashboards, I like that one a lot with the buttons to click through these. I can't make this click to another dashboard yet since we didn't make one. But another option is to make this thing called a story, which we haven't looked at yet. So you'll see this last sort of type of new thing we can make. It looks like a book with a plus sign, new story. And what this is think of it kind of like a PowerPoint deck. So every time you click blank here, you're adding another page that you can have a caption up here, and then on each of these you can put a visual or you can put a dashboard. Now, even if you're just going to use one visual, like maybe you just want this bar graph on there, I suggest, rather than just dragging over this bar graph, I suggest you put it on a dashboard first and then bring that dashboard over, even if it's just that one thing. Because when you bring it over to the story, if it's just the visual, notice I can't center this, I can't delete this legend or rename it or anything like that. I can't change the way this looks at all. And so, well, that's not very good. And so it's better to put it on a dashboard first so you can get it centered, get it sized the way you want to and everything. And then, and you can even put like some text on it describing what it is, and then bring it over that dashboard over to the story. Also, what you might want to do if you're going to go with that approach is size the dashboard to be the same size as the story so that everything fits on here the same way it did when you built the dashboard. Okay, so there's two other things that I wanted to show, and again, really a lot of polishing something in Tableau is just figuring out what you like and how you want to lay it out and messing with colors. So lots of like right-clicking and going to format to change backgrounds or font colors or borders or add in pictures. Notice you can bring in images and stuff like that, messing with tiled versus floating, those sort of things. But so let's look at a couple other things that we can do. There's actually more than two. So first thing I want to show is if we just have, again, a basic bar like this, I think this is easier to see if I flip this to be vertical. So I'm just going to show this vertically, and I'm going to take off this company count label right now. So let's say I want to look at company count and some other numeric factor at the same time on here. So maybe I want to look at company count and I want to look at revenue. So there's a few different places that I can add revenue to this bar graph that I can drag it to. So one, which is probably the most basic one, is if I take revenue and drop it up here, and let's make that averaged, I just get now two bar graphs. Okay, that's fine. Where else can I drag revenue to? Let's take that back off of there. I could also drag it to this left-hand axis here. Notice how when I cursor over the axis, I get this bar here. Okay, well, that looks kind of like the thing that we just saw. So let's take revenue off of there. What I can also do is I can take this over. It's not working. I think it's because this is an aggregate. Let me try just looking at maybe growth versus revenue. So we'll do measure average growth. And then if I take revenue over here to the right-hand side, now if I drop it there, you're like, oh no, I've messed something up. What it's doing is we're going to make overlapping bar graphs, and I'll show you how this can be useful. So right now, since some of the bars are hidden behind other bars, Tableau thinks, well, that can't be what you want. So I'll show you dots instead. Let's go back here. So notice now we've got a growth and a revenue section. I'm going to change revenue to be averaged as well. It makes sense from both to be averaged or both summed. If I go back to this all section to affect both growth and revenue at the same time, for these marks, let's force them to be bars. And then what I can do is I can go to whichever bar is on top, which looks like the orange ones, and we can see over here orange is revenue. I'll go to the revenue section of this marks card, and if I click on size, I can decrease the size of those bars until I can see both sets. And I might want to fit this so it looks a little bit better. And so now we can start to look at patterns. Does it seem like the industries with the highest growth also tend to have the highest revenue? Well, probably not. And that can be just as interesting as if we did find a pattern. Maybe we thought that growth and revenue would kind of go hand in hand, but it seems like, okay, energy has the most revenue, but they're maybe second on growth. And consumer products and services was really high on growth, but not on revenue. Now, maybe that's because of Fuhu. If we took Fuhu out of here and looked at this again, maybe it seems like more of a correlation, but it doesn't seem like there's any sort of obvious pattern between these two to me. But those overlapping bar graphs can be very useful with that. Another thing that I wanted to show is, so in the last workshop we made this map, and we made these top and bottom sets for the top companies based on revenue as well as the bottom companies based on revenue, and we made those interact on a dashboard where I could cursor over these to see the top 5 and bottom 5 per state. Well, what if I wanted to see that as a tooltip? Like, so when I cursor over a state, it shows me those lists. Well, let's see how we would do that. First, I'm just going to delete that action from here just to make sure it doesn't like mess it up. So I'm going to go to Dashboard, Actions, make sure I highlight on this action and say Remove. It should work without removing that, but just to be safe here. I've had sometimes where the actions get all wonky when I've been working with people using Tableau, and so I want as little chance of it messing up as possible. So what I'm going to do now is if I click on Tooltip over on this filled map sheet, then I'm going to just click on the last part of this, hit return to go down to the next line. And then if we go to this insert up here, you'll see there's this sheets option where we can add a sheet into the tooltip. So for example, I can say I want to see the top 5 companies in the tooltip. And so I'll say OK. And you'll notice right now, again, it's giving us that same problem that it did last time, where if a company in that state was one of the top 5, it shows up, but otherwise it doesn't. And so what I need to do is go back to my top 5 sheet. And again, just like with the action, I've now got this special tooltip filter that it created for me that I need to add to context. So I click the drop down for that, add to context, it grays it out. And now if I go back over here, you'll see I'm seeing the top 5 companies within each state. So just another way to do it. You can put something like that into a tooltip. You can have bar graphs in the tooltip that change based on the state you're looking at, and all sorts of stuff. So just know that you can put visuals into the tooltip. And then the last thing that I wanted to show here is, so we already had these dashboards. Really, for either of these, it'll work. This is kind of in the way now, but this still works, that we can hover over an industry to see this stuff. Let's do this on maybe this one here. So what I'm going to do is, let's say that I wanted all of these things, the top and bottom 5 and that action's working here now too, for these ones. Let's do this. Let's take these off since we already kind of have that in our tooltip, and let's put a scatter plot in here. I need to be back on tiled, put the scatter plot in the bottom half. So I've got something like this. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to either of these 2 sheets, doesn't matter which one, and let's just make a filter that we can interact with. So I'm going to choose something categorical. Let's maybe do like industry. I'm going to take industry, put that into filters. I'm just going to say all of them and say OK, so nothing changed on my visual. And then if I go back to that filter that says industry and click the drop down for it and say show filter, now it gives me this filter over here where I could uncheck or check different industries. Well, there's a lot of them, so checking and unchecking probably isn't that useful. So I'm going to click the drop down arrow for this, and there's a lot of different ways I can show this thing. I'm going to do a single value drop down so that I can just choose one industry at a time that I want to see. And I'll change it back to all for now. Now if I go back to my dashboard where that map's located, if I click on that map to select it, click this little drop down arrow next to it, I'm going to go to filters here, and since I added industry as a filter, I can choose that here as well. So I'll say industry. Now, to make this what I want to do is I want to make that same filter work for both of these visuals. So let's click this drop down, and again, I'll make it a single value drop down just like what I had on the other one. And right now, again, this only affects my map. It didn't affect the scatter plot. And what I need to do first before I can even make this affect the scatter plot is I need to go back to my scatter plot over here, and I need to make sure it knows what industry each of these is. And it does. I put industry on the tooltip. If I hadn't done that, this wouldn't work, and I'd have to add industry to detail or tooltip or label or something. It would have to know what industry is associated with each of these dots. Okay, so then what I can do is back on our dashboard here, if I click this drop down again for that filter, I'm going to cursor over this apply to worksheets, and it's default to be only the worksheet that it was tied to originally. But I can say selected worksheets, and I can choose the other visuals on this dashboard for it to apply to as well, and say okay. And now you'll see if I change this, the scatter plot and the map both change to show for that industry. And another cool thing I can do is let's edit a title here. So I'm going to hide this one, and I'm going to just put in like a text box. And so what we can say is revenue by state and revenue versus worker count for, and then what I'm going to do is go to this insert, and it's not going to work here. So I'll have to do this in the title. So let's see. So I need to go back to my map. Let me just take this map off and bring it back over to get the title back on here. Let's see if this still works for it. It does, okay. So I'm going to double click this title here, and I'm going to make this all like black or something, and we'll say that this is revenue by state and revenue per worker count for and then if I go to insert, I can choose industry, and then what I like to do is maybe make this reference here. You'll see in a second what I'm doing here, a special color so that it shows up. And when it's all, it doesn't make sense. We can mess with the wording to try and have it work for this. But now you can see like for the construction industry, for the government services industry. And so in a title or text, if you can put in a reference to a filter, then you can make it dynamic to show for whatever value that filter is. And then what you might even want to do is for specifically this filter, if you click the drop down for it, you can say floating. And then now I can move this thing wherever I want to. Like I could just put it up here in the corner instead of it being taking up that entire side of the page. Okay, again, saving works the same way. So if you wanted to save whatever you've made to your Tableau Public profile, again, that's the only save option if you're using Tableau Public. If you're using desktop, you can also save it locally to your computer. But if you're using Tableau Public, it'd be File, Save to Tableau Public As. If you aren't already signed in, it'll ask you to sign in, and then you can save this as whatever you want. When you hit save, make this like worked through, so I know later which one this is. If you hit save, then it takes you to where that thing is on your public profile, which is going to take a second while it thinks because we've got a lot of sheets in there. And then I'll come back and show how to do it again for desktop. So it takes you to where this is on your public profile, and again, you can use this gear icon to change the way that these things all look. If you are using Tableau Desktop, you can do File, Save to your computer normally. If you're going to save it to your public profile, again, you have to first do a data extract. So you'd have to go to the Data tab, cursor over this data set that we're using, and then choose the option in here that says something about extract data. I think it's just called extract data. Just click yes or okay or apply or whatever through those menus. You don't have to change anything. So it's like okay, and then save. And then after you've done that, come back up here and go to the option called Server. And under Server, at the bottom of that dropdown, cursor over Tableau Public, and then save to Tableau Public As. And then again, it'll ask you to sign in, and then you can save to your public profile and make it where you can get a link for it and all that sort of stuff. It talks about all that, again, in the first workshop. Hopefully that shows some more in-depth. Again, there's so many different things you can do with formatting and everything. A lot of us just playing around, but hopefully that gave you ideas and showed you some tools and techniques to make some nice looking visuals that are easy to follow. And again, just always kind of, when you're ready to publish this thing, go through and make sure stuff's lined up. There's no typos. Keep in mind there's no spell check in Tableau, so if you're prone to typos, you might want to type big chunks of text in Word or something and then bring them over here. Make sure there's no like dots where words didn't fit. Make sure that anything that should have units on it does, all that sort of stuff. For some of these, I didn't spend too much time cleaning it up because that's already something I stressed in the first workshop. But that's something you always want to do when you're getting ready to publish it, is just look at your tooltips, look at your labels, look at the axes, make sure that everything that you want there is there and that you don't have anything extra and all that sort of stuff. Thank you all for watching, and hopefully that was helpful.